Ladies and gentlemen, Cahirloch Corla Buntan Cavan, a Cahirloch Dun Counter Vadasach, a Priamanach Corla Huntan Cavan, a Corlori Archula, a Hacladola, a Gwiniushla. Whiteam Falter Corol, Guji Larna, Earnoch and Cavan. The Cahirloch of Cavan County Council, Councillor Philip Brady, Deputy Brendan Smith, our Chief Executive, Mr. Tommy Ryan, each of the elected members of Cavan County Council, the people of Cavan and all the interested library users of County Cavan. I'd like to welcome you all to Johnston Central Library here this evening. This evening we propose to launch a publication of diaspora memories and reflections as prepared and expertly curated by one of our own, Jonathan Smyth. Jonathan is one of our staff here in the Central Library and is a very much loved and appreciated member of our staff. So we will keep the proceedings relatively informal. I'll shortly hand over to our Cahirloch and our Chief Executive will also address you. At that point in time, Jonathan will have his moment of glory, and rightly so, and he'll give us a reflection on this wonderful new publication. So, Ardus, Quorum Glake, our Cahirloch, Corla and Cuntavan, and Corlior, Councillor Philip Brady. I'd like to call upon the Cahirloch of Cavan County Council, Councillor Philip Brady, to say a few words.
Guests, fellow councillors, deputies, all deputies, Chief Executive Tommy Ryan, Director of Service Owen Dial, Emma Clancy, and of course the man at the moment, Jonathan Smyth. Ladies and gentlemen, tá na áthas orm fáilte a chomh gach duine chuig an library Cavan Calling fiche trí. Lerian an féile seo gach rud atá iontach faoin ar gunlaí agus ar nóí faoi muinteoir an Cavan. I am delighted as Cahirloch to be here this evening to help launch the book for Jonathan Smyth. It is fitting that we launched the book during the Cavan Calling as we are promoting about the Cavan Diaspora all over the world. The diaspora is vital to all the men and women who leave our shores and don't ever want to forget their roots. And we learned from the unveiling of the Jim McKiernan plaque that people may go but their heart may always remain at home. The book details over 100 people who have Cavan connections, and it should be very fascinating to hear and read all the stories and the different views where the book and where people were brought all over the world, where they've learned and travelled and learned different languages, different cultures, and see what occupations that they came upon them. And I know Jonathan was speaking on the radio today and he spoke a few stories about where different people ended up and what they took on when they went. So again, it's going to be very fascinating to read. We know the work that Jonathan does here in the library, which is exceptional and to the highest standards. The book's name, Faith, Hard Work and Endurance, typifies what Jonathan is about. He does fantastic writing in the Anglo-Celt, and we were joking that we might get the front page this week instead of the middle pages. We all know that the work Jonathan has put into the book, it is nearly 3 years now, from when he started, and a lot of work has got in, and I know the Anglo-Celt has been great to him, but it does promise to be a fascinating read. I'd like to thank Cavan County Council for asking Jonathan and commissioning the book, putting it together, and especially to have it ready for the Cavan Calling Diaspora Festival. I'd like to thank Emma Clancy and all the library staff for the excellent work they do, and Emma has done a fantastic amount of work for the festival. And I know the staff do an excellent job here, and my sons do be in looking at the fish most days and probably making lots of noise, so I apologise. I'd like to wish Jonathan the best of luck with the book, and I'd like to wish him the best of luck in the future. I am delighted, as I say, as Cahirloch, to be here to launch the book, and I look forward to reading it and many more stories to hear about you, Jonathan. So, thank you.
We had a civic reception earlier today, and it was for associations and individuals of our diaspora who have achieved so much over many generations. And one of the comments was that successive coherently elected members and officials of the council have really prioritised the diaspora, perhaps none more so than our Chief Executive, Mr. Tommy Ryan. In that regard, it's only right that I should at this particular juncture call upon the Chief Executive of Cavan County Council, Mr. Tommy Ryan, to address you.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Owen. Cathaoirleach, Deputy Smyth, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here at the launch of Jonathan Smyth's book. I think it has been a long time coming. We intended to launch it in 2020, and when Cavan Calling was originally arranged for 2020, and it could have been done in the meantime, but we delayed it until Cavan Calling could be arranged, because I think that's the most appropriate time to launch a book like this. This specially commissioned publication acknowledges the immense contribution that Cavan people have made worldwide, and their extended families and the diaspora that have travelled all over the world. And it chronicles the lives of 104 of the most notable Cavan people, or people who have Cavan connections. And there's a wide range of people chronicled. And I suppose if you're from the Cavan diaspora, can I just say you should be delighted you're not in the book, because it's only people that are a long time dead, historical figures. So if you're reading about yourself, just be glad you're not there. So, and I suppose it's worth remembering that while the book deals with noteworthy Cavan people, of whom there were public records, there are over many generations thousands of people. In fact, I think 200,000 would have immigrated from Cavan to begin new lives for themselves in countries outside, far from home. And those thousands just went on to live normal lives. There's probably no record of their achievements, but they did live normal lives. The contribution those people made to where they set up home in whatever country they went to helped to develop those countries and cities that they went to. And they made a considerable contribution abroad. And we won't have histories of them, but we have some of them still wanting to come back and want to learn about their roots. So I think the success of people who left Cavan and achieved so much is a great source of pride and joy for the people back home. You're always proud of someone who left your county and did well. And what's heartening is that the people who went off and were successful, it didn't diminish their pride or their love for their home place. And I think Cathaoirleach mentioned that today about Jim McKiernan. So many of the Cavan people who went abroad have shown great generosity towards their homeland. And we must remember the people who sent remittances back. You know, when many people here left Cavan, it was a very poor place, and they went abroad and they worked and sent money home, and that kept a lot of people at home here being just able to live a life, or maybe to invest. And I know many people invested in churches and buildings and schools and farms and businesses and kept them going. And we must remember all those people, as well as the 104 in the book. The author, Jonathan Smyth, is a member of the Cavan County Library Service, and he's a noted researcher and historian. And you might read the book and you'd see there's something there, maybe 2 pages on some person. But if you just think about all the research that went into finding out that, proofing it, getting it right, and searching for that information, and then putting it into a readable form so that you can all enjoy it, it requires a lot of dedication and work. So Jonathan is extremely knowledgeable and has a special interest in history of Cavan. So I suppose it's not he doesn't see this as a job. I think it's a labour of love. And he has produced a history column, Times Past, for the Anglo-Celt over the past 8 years. And it's mostly an immigration team looking at different people. And I suppose it was really, when I saw all that, it's really important to compile it in a book as well. And that's a selection of what he wrote, is all that's in this book. We could have a bigger book, but maybe we'll have a second book, Jonathan. And so look, during the Fleadh, there was many connections built up with the Cavan diaspora, and I think we did develop a Cavan diaspora strategy in 2017, and that was further looking at a strategy of increased connection with our diaspora abroad. And Cavan Calling, which is ongoing at the moment, was an outcome of that strategy. It was one of the actions identified in that strategy. And this morning, as Owen mentioned, we had a civic reception for the Cavan associations, and there's associations in London, New York, Toronto and Philadelphia. There's a Cavan network in Dublin, and then we have twinning arrangements with Kurnak and Würzburg in Germany, with Gioni Marini in France and Rochester in New York State. So all of those connections are very important because we live in a global world now, and we must build our relationships with all of those people. And the GEA are celebrating 100 years of Breffni Park this week as well. And you know, the other night at the concert in the town hall, Laura Samuraku from Closest Airden was there, and he said how the Irish music and the GEA is keeps a lot of people involved in their Irish history as well. When they go abroad, it's a huge, I think, connection for people when they go abroad. So all of those organisations have an important role to play in building relations with our diaspora. So I finally just want to thank people involved, and I suppose to be remiss not to mention Emma Clancy, who has been stressed out for the last week or so, hoping everything would go all right, in responsible for the whole Cavan Calling and doing all the work there. So I want to thank Emma, and of course to Jonathan for compiling the book. And he had to make a decision how many he put in, or who are the 104, I think. And look, there's good reading, and I must say he didn't shirk. You know, you won't be proud of everyone that's in the book. But they were noteworthy, but maybe not for good reasons. But to be fair, Jonathan didn't shirk from putting in the ex-murderers as well as the people who did well, or the swindlers as well as the people who were very benevolent. So well done, Jonathan.
Thank you, Tommy. So it behoves me at this stage to call upon the man of the moment, the author of this beautiful book, and I suppose the only thing that I can say in relation to it, it is a book of love. It's a book that has been sincerely curated and very personally researched by Jonathan. So the stage is yours, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this evening. It's an occasion which I think will be memorable for myself for years to come. But before I say anything about the book, I'd like to just acknowledge a few people without whom this evening would not have been possible. The Diaspora book, which is being launched here this evening, was commissioned by Cavan County Council for the Cavan Calling Festival, and it's an initiative of the Chief Executive, Mr. Tommy Ryan. And I'd like to say thank you to Cavan County Council and to our Chief Executive, Mr. Tommy Ryan. I would also like to acknowledge the Director of Services, Owen Doyle, County Librarian, Emma Clancy, Teresa Tracy, Sinead McCardle, and also my colleagues in Cavan Library Service for their encouragement and support. I wish to acknowledge Tom Sullivan and Dr. Brendan Scott, and also to say thank you to Jackie O'Neill for her fine painting of an emigration scene, which appears in the book. Also deserving of a special mention, is Mary Sullivan and Concepta McGovern of Cavan Genealogy Centre, whom I plagued with some very awkward questions at times. So the book itself has turned out very well, and I think the printers have done a very fine job on it. I suppose for many years now I've had the privilege of writing a weekly column in the Anglo-Celt, and many of those featured an emigration theme, and as a portion of those have gone into the book. So I'd also like to acknowledge the editor Linda O'Reilly and deputy editor Damien McCarney. And I'm also particularly grateful to my own family, to my wife Pauline and our sons Keanu, Ethan and Noah, and also to my parents. And I'd also like to just acknowledge my colleagues who are working here this evening. We're going to take a look at one or two people from the book, and I promise not to delay you unduly. The Cavan Diaspora has produced many a famous son and daughter whose family roots are firmly, I suppose, set in the soil of the Lake County. Of the 104 stories in this collection, I hope that most of them will pique your curiosity. And the stories which made it into the book were those who didn't. So it had to be a choice made on that. From the stories which are told in this book, it may be seen that the diaspora from Cavan participate in all kinds of work, from construction, mining, soldiering, politics, church, farming, writing, medicine, and much more, including the infamous ones. Starting their life in a new country was for many people the ultimate act of survival. And it's often was said by older generations, when I was growing up, I would hear people say that a Cavan person could go anywhere in the world because they'd experienced every type of hardship already known to man. So another thing, I remember in my university days, we were out for dinner one evening, and somebody made a joke about Cavan, and this Canadian friend leaned over and he said, well, you know, he says, you're from Cavan in Ireland. And I says, that's right. He says, have I ever told you that county produced some of the most successful entrepreneurs in Canada and the States, he said. And he said that basically in the 19th century, most millionaires in America were Cavan. And, you know, I think he's not far wrong, because in Montana alone, you had Marcus Daly, the Copper King, and also in Montana, you had Thomas Cruise, not Mission Impossible, and he was the Gold King of Montana. So you had those two. They're just two of the many. And of course, this doesn't surprise me, because it's correct to say that Cavan people are by nature tenacious, hardworking, and smart. Luckily, for many years now, I've been able to compile a list of topics, and my evenings are often spent reading and following potential leads for stories. And information can come from anywhere from libraries, genealogy centres, graveyards, people getting in contact, and other times just good luck. And so there's not too much sitting in front of Coronation Street. So now I'll just take a brief look at some of the people, just a couple that I've picked. One of the, as I said, the good, the bad, and the infamous, but one of the ones which I class as the good was Mary Ann Sadlier, the writer from Cootehill. She was a daughter of Francis and Mary Madden of Church Street, Cootehill. Her mother's family had a mill, Foy's Mill, which many will know of, at Bono. Her father in his heyday was a very successful merchant, but with the decline of the linen industry and there was a lack of jobs, then a lot of the women at that time would have worked at spinning wheels and that, and brought in an income. But Mary Ann was a very intelligent person. She began to write stories and sell them to magazines in London, like a Label Ensemble. And she, at the age of 24, she sailed for North America, Canada initially. And what better thing to do if you want to be a writer but marry a publisher? So she married James Sadlier, the owner of D&J Sadlier Publishers in New York. And she later took over the publishing company when her husband died. And she continued to operate that for many years. And in fact, the Sadlier Publishing Company still continues to publish books to this day, and that's just an interesting Cavan connection still exists there. She wrote approximately 70 novels, and you'd imagine that would have afforded her a degree of comfort. But she was very unlucky in a sense, because one of her relatives who inherited the business took the copyright as well. But if success to be measured in book sales, many of her books went to 16th edition reprints. And she sold anywhere there was the Irish diaspora, whether it was Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, and she had a 300,000 readership. Her books often looked at themes such as escaping the famine and overcoming the harsh realities they met when they went to new countries, and also she encouraged them to hold on to the faith they had brought from Ireland. We're going to look at another story now, and actually I should have put up a picture for her. That's Mary Ann Sadlier there. And that is a picture which it haunted me to find that picture. There is one picture which is normally always used, but my mother had done research on Mary Ann Sadlier, and she had this picture which we couldn't find anywhere, but at the last moment got it, and it got into the book. Now, we're going to mention just, there's a variety of stories. Another story is about the Dempsey family vacation in 1939. And a few years ago, a lady named Marion Dempsey, she's here this evening, she sent to me a memoir by Robert Dempsey of his family trip to his father and came over to Ireland in just before the outbreak of the Second World War. And they ended up, they couldn't leave Cavan because Hitler had his U-boats out sinking ships. So it ended up anyway that after staying much longer than anticipated, Roosevelt had managed to agree for a ship to come over and bring them home. But I also learned that the author of the memoir was a 5-year-old boy in the story, so he got into the book, and he's actually still he's alive now, living in New York, which I hadn't realised at the time. I hadn't realised at the time, so, but I hadn't realised. But when speaking of the Dempseys, I think it would be remiss not to mention the late Sadie Markey of Skerrick Hill. She did a great deal to unite many of the Dempsey clans, and would often come into the library here looking for information. And I remember being able to produce a book from the local collection all about the Dempseys. And but I just thought I'd mention her this evening. Also, just going back to getting back to America, they were to the Dempsey. Patrick Dempsey was told, well, you can send half your family now and half the family later because for safety reasons. They said, no, he says, I'm a family man, they're all going. And when they got back to New York, a journalist met them, and he says, well, do you think you'll have a chance going back to Ireland again? And his reply was short and sweet. He said, you can't keep an Irish man out of Ireland. And another person that was a particular person I found very interesting. He was an unusual kind of an unusual character. Do we have him here? Yes, with a tall hat. He was Father Francis McSpirit, and he was known as a healer with a piercing gaze, and said that he became famous throughout Canada and America, but it was said that by nature he was very unassuming, but that the piercing gaze of his bright eyes appeared friendly to the honest, but to the dishonest it became a terrifying blaze. He was born on a farm in the townland of Drumbeg in parish of Templeport in 1836. And in fact, he was educated here in the Kilmore Academy, which was just down beside, the other side of the courthouse. And he headed off to America with his sister Anne and brother John in 1860. And afterwards trained for the priesthood in the Grand Seminaire de Montreal in Canada. And the Diocese of Toronto became his base for the next 30 years. And many of his early miracles included the healing of an American, for some reason they had it in inverted commas, an American citizen, this is in Canada, and whose sight was restored, and a girl with St. Vitus dance that was cured. And said overnight a steady stream of sick flocked into Canada to see him from America and wherever. And the Archbishop got a little bit worried because it was in an area where there was mixed faiths, and he thought that the opposition faith would be laughing or something, But it wasn't the case. Both, all faiths respected this man and came to him. And he became affectionately known as Father Mac. And the perplexed Archbishop said, well, I'm going to send him off somewhere where they mightn't find him. So they sent him to a parish called Adjala, Adjala, and they said there was no roads into it and there was no railways, but they still found him. And he'd often, if somebody came to him, if they were of a different faith, he'd find out what their weakness was, if it was alcohol or cigarettes, and he'd tell them they had to give that up. And but there was not all parishioners were his favourites, and he seemed to be quite direct. And he wrote into the death register something which I suppose you shouldn't expect to find in a death register. He said he wrote, one Julia was quite enough in a province, quite enough in a century, and one too many in the church for a whole continent, socially and religiously a nonentity. May she rest in peace. But an interesting was after he died in 1895, and an interesting thing was that we think of Templeport, St. Mogue's Island and the clay and protective and healing, and woman who was on the Titanic who said that she didn't die because she had the clay from St. Mogue's Island. But when Father McSpirit died, they dug his grave out several times over the years, and in the 1930s they said it had to be refilled several times where they'd taken the clay to heal. The next person we look at is, it'll be explained in a moment. So, Charles McKiernan, aka Joe Beef, he was described as a man with a social conscience, and he championed the poor man's corner. So Joe Beef his real name was Charles McKiernan from Cavan, from Lavey in fact, and he was basically in Montreal, Canada. He became a formidable voice for the working classes. He lobbied government officials for better conditions as well. And he was born in Lavey, County Cavan, on the 4th of December 1835. He spent some time in the British Army as a cook, but they said that when there were no rations could be found, he would always find enough rations to feed the troops, and so he got the name Joe Beef. So when he left the army, he went to Montreal and he opened an inn. He called it the Crown and Sceptre, but it soon became known across North America as Joe Beef's Canteen. And Beef helped all and sundry, as I said, regardless of race, and once said, I never refuse. I have to leave a word out of this because it's an N-word, so I'm not going to say it. Beef helped all and sundry, regardless of race, and once said, I never refuse a meal to a poor man, no matter who he is, whether he be English, French, Irish, Indian, or what religion he belongs to. And he says, he's sure to get a free meal at my place, even if he can't afford it. So between 12 and noon and 1 p.m, crowds would amass and come for a feed and a pint at Joe's. And said each day 600 meals were prepared, and true to form, Joe always mustered up enough to feed a small army. Now the bar, he had some interesting memorabilia behind the bar. He had two skeletons. One was said to represent Beef's late wife, and the other was a reminder to his family back in Cavan. And that wasn't all he had that was unusual in the pub. He had two, there were trapdoors could be lifted up and you could look down into it. And there was a menagerie of parrots, exotic creatures, monkeys, wild cats, all sorts of things. And he also kept a famous exhibit. He kept bears on the premises. So imagine people drinking and bears around you, Although I suppose some people maybe feel like a bear after a few too many, but One of the famous bears was called Jenny, and they said the unfortunate animal was never sober. It was always found sitting on its hindquarters with a bottle of beer in its paws, and swallowed up to 20 pints a day. And the only thing that which was probably a bit more shocking, he would have brought the bears out to fight with dogs, but on a lighter moment, he was often found playing billiards with the bears. And he ended up in hospital once or twice because of it. We mentioned Thomas Cruise, and Thomas Cruise spent a lot of time, spent years before he actually struck gold, and he was on his hands and knees. He'd go into, Thomas Cruise spent years on his hands and knees just digging away to try and find the gold. And when he struck gold, became very wealthy, set up a bank, Cruise Bank. However, he wasn't a fan of the banks because they hadn't helped him out in the early days, and they'd refuse him credit. He hadn't the price to buy beans or bacon, and in 1893 there was a big crash, and they all came looking for Cruise and asked him to a meeting, and they were very nice to him and said, "Can you help us?" They knew that the vault was full. It was full at Cruise's, and he listened to them, and then he turned round and he was quite blunt. He just said, he says, "Are you all through with your spieling? I wonder how many of you remember when I was ragged, hungry and tired, not one of you gave me a pleasant look, let alone lend me $1. If you haven't forgotten those days, I have not." And he says, "You may all go to hell." So Cruise stood up, walked out, and that was it. So he became the main bank about town, I suppose. Mina Benson, Benson Hubbard. It's not for me, is it? Mina Benson Hubbard. She was the sixth child in a family of 8 children. She was born in Canada in April 1870. Her father, James Benson, had emigrated from Cavan to Canada, and according to the Griffiths valuation, they lived in the parish of Tomregan, her ancestors. And James Benson settled with his wife Jane on a 100-acre apple farm in Bewdley, Ontario. And Mina trained as a nurse, and her first patient was a journalist named Leonidas Hubbard. After he got well, they were married. So it must have, that was her first patient. But and he was a journalist with the Outing magazine, which looked at outdoors, wildlife, that type of thing. And he decided to go on an expedition, and everything planned, what he was bringing, food, everything else, and a team of workers to come with him. But during the expedition, he died, and it failed, the expedition. But Mina, she asked one of his friends to write a book about her husband to try and clarify what had happened. But her friend took advantage of the situation to make himself the hero and say her husband had failed, and that's why the expedition hadn't worked right. So Mina wasn't taking any of this, she had none of this, so she got together, she got this man who'd been the man looking after the maps, and that was the lead character that was helping her husband, and they set off on an expedition themselves. And she completed what he originally set out to do. They mapped this particular river, which if I can just pronounce it. It was something like the Nessascapi River, and she mapped that anyhow, and she wrote a book on it, and she cleared her husband's name, and she completed the trip in record time. And so the Nessascapi River, and in 61 days she covered 576 miles through I might say there was actually, I made enough mention, it was Labrador in northern Canada, which is some of the most remote terrain in Canada, which is basically more or less unexplored. So she also went on further expeditions in her life. She was described as fearless. So that she had Cavan ancestry, Cavan father. And just before I kind of go on too long, I just finally mention, I see there was a talk here earlier on Colonel Patrick Henry O'Rourke, and he's in the book, and I've seen where he's been described as a major folk hero to the people of Monroe County in New York, and his story is well known throughout Rochester City. There's also a bridge named after him in Rochester, and he's commemorated by a monument at Little Round Top. And in 2014, a beautiful memorial was erected in the townland of the Colonel's birth at Cornafane, Drumbess, Cornafane. And so he had basically, it was less than a month after his graduation, found himself in the thick of a battle fighting the Unions on the Union side of the American Civil War at Blackburn's Run. On his first day, his horse was killed. It was shot from under him. He'd served at first as a first lieutenant or a lieutenant, depending on what pronunciation, in the Corps of Engineers. In September 1862, he was elevated to colonel and commander of the 140th Volunteer Infantry. And on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863, Colonel O'Rourke was said to have confidently led his men forward to save the Union position at Little Round Top. And however, he was taken down in an instant when a stray bullet hit him and killed him. And also, just something I thought was very interesting was that the O'Rourke Society in Rochester in recent times organised a petition calling on the American President to posthumously award the Medal of Honour to Colonel Patrick O'Rourke, and I've mentioned that in the book. And also a very fine biography on O'Rourke is here in the library by Brian A. Bennett. And just before I start going on too long and people start falling asleep, I'll just conclude now. And just, I suppose, in conclusion, I hope that faith, hard work and endurance, it'll bring fascination and enjoyment to the reader, and that it will be a promotion of all that is good and great about Cavan, its people and the Cavan Diaspora. Gaurav Mila Mahagot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. A wonderful presentation. I think you see within that how much this area of work means to Jonathan. And as was said earlier by the Chief Executive and the Cathaoirleach, and I want to join in that Jonathan's work here in the library is extremely valued, as is the staff of the entire library service, many of whom I see are curled outside there, Teresa and all of our staff. Under the careful leadership of my colleague Emma Clancy, who has another job apart from Cavan Calling. She's the county librarian, and I'd say, Tommy, she's been worried for more than just the last week on Cavan Calling, but she's done a fabulous job on that. And I just want to acknowledge Emma's work and that of the team. On the same team, I do want to acknowledge the former staff that are here. I know Tom Sullivan is down there, and Mary also, and Concepta. They've left a fabulous legacy, and part of which I think you see here this evening. So I'm just going to conclude, if I could, my very final remarks are, because I do know I'm speaking on behalf of Emma and all of the library staff, past and present. We just want to say on a personal note that Jonathan is a hugely respected colleague. He's an extremely sincere and genuine person, and a wonderful colleague to everyone. And everyone is sincerely delighted that he's brought this project to culmination, and that he himself now can be so mightily proud. Well done, Jonathan.